The sound of the storm outside blended with the echo of his father's voice in his mind, cold, final, uncheckable. If you walk out that door, Michael, don't bother coming back. The young man stood in the grand marble foyer, suitcase in one hand, the woman he loved waiting outside in the rain. Then I guess this isn't home anymore, he said quietly. Behind him, portraits of generations of wealth stared down like silent judges. He turned away from all of it, the power, the inheritance, the name, and chose love instead. That night, under a flickering streetlight, Michael and Claire boarded a bus that smelled of diesel and stranger stories. She clutched his hand, whispering, "You sure about this?" He smiled through the fear. For the first time in my life, they arrived in a small coastal town, with only a few $100s and the clothes on their backs. The first few months were brutal. He worked at a mechanic's shop, his soft hands learning the language of grease and grit. They lived in a one-room apartment above a bakery, waking up to the smell of bread instead of perfume and luxury. Yet, for the first time, Michael felt alive. Every night, Claire would wait for him with dinner, sometimes just soup and laughter, and he realized happiness didn't come from chandeliers or bank accounts. It came from peace. One evening, as they watched the sun sink into the sea, Claire said softly, "Do you ever miss it?" He thought of his family's mansion, the cars, the servants, the empty dinners in silence. "No," he said finally, "because that life never felt like mine." But in the distance, the world he left behind was stirring, and soon it would come knocking. The days turned into months, and Michael and Claire built a life from nothing. Their apartment was small, their furniture mismatched, but laughter filled every corner. Michael found joy in fixing engines and learning from men who had lived harder lives than he ever knew existed. For the first time, he wasn't the grand heir. He was just Michael, a man who worked with his hands, who came home smelling like oil and sea salt, who kissed his wife with grease still on his fingers. One evening, as they ate dinner on the floor, a loaf of bread, a bowl of soup, to candles, Claire looked at him and smiled. "You look happy," she said. "I am," he replied. "For once. I'm not pretending." But the world he left behind hadn't forgotten him. One rainy afternoon, a black car pulled up outside the shop. His former family lawyer stepped out, polished and out of place among the dust and oil. "Your father's health is failing," he said. "He's asking for you." Michael froze. It had been almost 2 years since that night. "Why now?" he asked bitterly. "Because he finally realized what he lost," the lawyer replied. Michael stared at the rain hitting the pavement, torn between anger and longing. That evening, Claire found him sitting quietly by the window. "You should go," she said gently. "Closure isn't betrayal." He took her hand. "But what if he just wants to fix his legacy, not us?" "Then you'll know the difference," she whispered. The next morning, Michael packed his old suitcase again, the same one he carried when he left, and headed toward the mansion he once called home. The mansion hadn't changed, same tall windows, same scent of polished marble and power. But to Michael, it felt smaller now. The staff greeted him with hesitant smiles. Unsure if he was still one of them, his father was in the study, sitting by the fireplace, thinner than he remembered, pride still burning behind tired eyes. "You came," his father said. Michael stood silently. "You wanted to see me," he replied. The old man gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, you've proven your point. You can survive without us. But now, I need you back. The board wants a Grant in charge again." Michael laughed bitterly. "You didn't call me here for forgiveness. You called me for business." His father's voice softened. "You gave up everything for a woman who will never understand this world. But blood. Michael, blood never fades, neither does love," Michael said quietly. "And hers didn't come with conditions." The room went still. His father's hand trembled slightly. "You'd throw away your inheritance for pride." "No," Michael said, "for peace." As he stood to leave, the old man called out, "She'll leave you one day." They all do. Michael turned, eyes steady. Even if she does, at least she have stayed for love, not money. When he returned home that night, Claire was waiting at the door, her face full of relief. How did it go? She asked. Michael smiled faintly, wrapping his arms around her. It went exactly as it was supposed to, but as he looked out the window toward the dark city skyline, he knew his father wasn't done. Power never surrenders quietly. The next morning, Michael woke before sunrise, unable to shake the conversation from his mind. He watched Claire sleeping beside him, peaceful, unaware of the storm still lingering in his thoughts. He knew his father too well. The man didn't ask twice unless there was something he couldn't control. As he left for work, a black SUV was already parked near the mechanic's shop. Two men in suits stepped out. "Mr. Grant," one said, "your father insists you reconsider. There are legal matters that require your signature." Michael shook his head. "Tell him I'm done signing my life away." He walked past them, grease-stained hands gripping his tools tighter than ever. But when he came home that evening, the apartment door was slightly open. Inside, Claire sat on the couch, pale and shaken. "They came," she whispered. "Your father's men. They said you owe the company something." Michael's blood ran cold. "What did they do?" "Nothing," she said, trembling. "But they knew about the baby." The words hit him like a storm. "You're—" Claire nodded slowly. "I was going to tell you." He sank to his knees, emotion flooding him. "They're not taking this from us," he said fiercely. "Not again." The next day, he went to the city, straight into his father's office. "This ends now," he said. The old man looked up from his desk, calm as ever. "You think you can escape this family? You're a Grant whether you like it or not." Michael leaned forward. "Then I'll make that name mean something different." He placed the keys to his old apartment, the last link to his past, on the desk. "Keep your money. Keep your power. I have something you'll never own." And with that, he walked away again, this time, not for rebellion, but for love that no contract could break. The weeks that followed were both peaceful and uncertain. Michael and Claire settled into their small life by the coast, focusing on the baby, on work, and on rebuilding from the ashes of what they had escaped. Each morning began with sunlight through thin curtains, the sound of waves breaking against the docks, and the distant hum of fishing boats. Michael found comfort in the routine, hands blackened by grease, laughter shared over simple meals, and evenings where they talked about the future instead of money. But some nights, when Claire slept, he still stared at the ceiling, haunted by the weight of his father's words. "You'll regret this one day." As he was fixing an old truck, an unfamiliar voice called out from behind. "You're the Grant boy, aren't you?" Michael turned. It was an elderly man, the shop's oldest customer. "Used to read about your family in the papers," the man continued. "Didn't think a Grant knew how to hold a wrench." Michael smiled faintly. "Guess I had to learn." The man nodded approvingly. "Then you've learned what money can't buy." Later that week, Claire went into labor early. Panic and love collided as Michael rushed her to the small-town clinic. Hours passed in chaos, until finally a cry. A baby girl. When the nurse placed her in his arms, everything went quiet. He whispered, "You'll never know what it's like to be bought," as he held his daughter. Michael realized his father's curse had turned into a gift, losing everything had given him, something no fortune could replace. A family built on choice, not bloodlines. Outside, the sea roared as if to mark the beginning of their real forever. Months later, Michael found himself standing behind the counter of the little bakery, flour on his hands instead of ink. The business had grown. The locals loved bread Claire baked and the car repairs Michael offered behind the shop. The scent of sugar and motor all oddly fit together, imperfect, but theirs. One quiet afternoon, a young journalist stopped by for coffee. "You're Michael Grant, aren't you? The one who left everything behind?" she asked, curious. Michael smiled, unbothered. "That's what they say. Do you regret it?" She pressed. He thought for a long moment. The ocean shimmered outside, the sound of laughter from his daughter echoing across the street. "No," he said finally, "because I stopped measuring life in money and started measuring it in moments." The journalist nodded slowly, realizing she wasn't talking to a fallen heir but a man who had rebuilt himself. That evening, Claire joined him outside as the sun dipped low. "She's asleep," she said, sitting beside him. "You know," Michael whispered, "I used to think love was something you proved. Now I know it's something you protect." Claire smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you did." In the distance, thunder rolled faintly, but it didn't scare him anymore. He had weathered worse storms. The man who once had everything had learned that peace wasn't something you inherited, it was something you earned, one choice at a time. As the last light faded, Michael whispered to himself, "I gave up my fortune for love, and I never looked back." Time moved like the tide, quietly, steadily, reshaping everything in its path. Michael's hands were rough now, his clothes often stained, but his heart had never been lighter. Claire had started painting again, using the small space behind the bakery as her studio. The colors she chose reflected their new life: deep blues for peace, warm golds for love, and soft gray for the pieces of the past they had made peace with. Their daughter, Amelia, had just turned 2. Her laughter the music of their mornings. One day, as Michael walked her to the park, he saw a familiar face sitting on a bench, his father's lawyer. The same man who once came to pull him back into a world he'd escaped. "You have visitors, Michael," the man said, standing awkwardly. Behind him, an older woman stepped out of a car, his mother. She looked smaller than he remembered, her expensive coat unable to hide the weight of guilt. "I had to see you," she said softly. "Your father is gone." The words hit harder than he expected. "He left this," she continued, handing him an envelope. Inside was a letter, written in shaky handwriting. "Asterisk, you were right. I built walls where love should have been. I hope one day you'll forgive me, not for what I said, but for what I couldn't understand." Asterisk. Michael folded the letter, his throat tight. His mother's eyes welled up. "He was proud of you." In his way, he nodded slowly. Maybe he was. Maybe I just needed to stop needing his approval. As his mother turned to leave, she looked at the little girl running toward them. "She looks like you," she whispered. "No," Michael said softly, watching his daughter smile. "She looks free." The days after the funeral felt strangely calm. Michael didn't cry, not because he wasn't sad, but because he had already mourned his father years ago, the day he walked out of that mansion for good. Still, something about holding that letter made him realize how much time they had both lost. Back home, Claire watched him carefully, sensing the quiet storm behind his eyes. "You don't have to be strong right now," she said softly. "I'm not being strong," he replied. "I'm just learning to let go." They sat on the porch that evening, watching Amelia chase the sunset, her laughter spilling into the air. "You know what's strange?" Michael murmured. "My father spent his whole life chasing power, and I spent mine trying to escape it. But here, like this, I finally feel in control." Claire smiled faintly. "Because this is the life you chose." He nodded. "Yeah, and for the first time." I think he would have understood that. Weeks later, an unexpected letter arrived from the board of the Grant Foundation. They wanted Michael to attend the annual charity event his father had once hosted. "They're offering you a seat," Claire said, reading the invitation. "They'd probably expect a speech." Michael stared at it for a long moment. "Then I'll give them one they'll never forget. The night of the gala." Whispers followed him through the marble halls he once called home. When he stepped on stage, the room fell silent. "My father built this empire," he began, "but he also built walls. I spent years trying to tear them down. Today, I stand here not as a Grant, but as a man who finally learned that legacy isn't money, it's kindness, honesty, and love." There was no applause at first, only stunned faces. Then, slowly, people began to rise. Claire's eyes glistened as she watched him speak his truth, not to impress, but to heal. That night, when they walked home beneath the city lights, Michael felt something he hadn't in years: freedom. Not from his father, but from the shadow of his own past. The night after the gala, Michael couldn't sleep. The applause still echoed in his head. But it wasn't pride keeping him awake, it was peace. For the first time in his life, silence didn't scare him. He sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching dawn creep over the horizon. Claire stepped out in her robe, her hair a soft mist of curls. "You're thinking again," she teased. "Always," he smiled. "But this time, not about what I've lost." She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "So what now?" she asked. "We keep living," he said simply. "We teach her what love really means. That it's not control or fear, it's choosing each other." Every single day, later that morning, as Amelia played in the sand near the water, Michael's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Asterisk, "You made him proud." Asterisk, "No name." Just that, he didn't need to know who sent it. Maybe his father had more allies in kindness than he'd realized. He smiled faintly, deleting the message. "What's that?" Claire called from the door. "Nothing that matters," he said, walking toward her. Years later, when Amelia would ask about her grandfather, Michael wouldn't tell her about the empire or the arguments. He'd tell her about the lesson. That love is the only legacy worth leaving. The bakery grew, their life blossomed in small, imperfect ways, and one evening, Michael framed his father's letter and hung it on the wall above the counter. Customers thought it was decoration. To him, it was a reminder: forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it frees you from it. And as he closed up shop each night, he would look at that letter and whisper to himself, "I didn't walk away from wealth. I walked toward peace." Years later, the bakery had become more than just a shop. It was a landmark of second chances. People came not only for bread or coffee, but for the warmth that seemed to live inside those walls. Photos of smiling customers lined the counter, and above them hung the framed letter, the one that had once symbolized pain, but now meant peace. Amelia, now 10, helped behind the counter on weekends, proudly wearing a tiny apron that read asterisk, "Daddy's helper." Asterisk, one afternoon, a man in a tailored suit entered, hesitant but curious. "You're Michael Grant?" he asked. "Used to be," Michael smiled. "Now I'm just Michael." The man handed him a document. "The board voted. They want to name a scholarship after your father, the Edward Grant Foundation for Second Chances. They said it was your speech that inspired it." Michael paused, emotion swelling quietly in his chest. "Second chances," he whispered. He'd like that later that night, as the last customers left. Michael and Claire sat outside watching Amelia chase fireflies. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The money, the mansion, the old life." He looked at his family, the golden sky fading into deep blue. "Not for a second," he said, "because this is what wealth was supposed to feel like." Claire smiled, resting her hand on his. "Then you finally built your legacy." He looked at her, eyes soft. "No, asterisk, we asterisk did." The wind carried the scent of bread, laughter, and peace through the night. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the world he had built from nothing and realizing it was everything he ever wanted. The man who once had everything had learned life's greatest truth. Love doesn't cost you, it saves you. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that love, peace, and forgiveness are worth more than any fortune, then you already understand Michael's journey. We all have moments when we have to choose between pride and peace, between control and love. And sometimes the hardest road leads to the softest place, home. Tell me in the comments, what would you choose, comfort or true love? If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like the video, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end. Every week, I share new emotional journeys. Maybe the next one will speak directly to your heart.